In my previous video, I talked about muting colors and the advantage of doing that. In today's lesson, I'm going to share painting so you can see it firsthand. What I have is a color wheel so we can talk about complementary colors. I've got a palette here that I'm using for mixing. This is my favorite palette. This is my 18 color palette, and I've got a video on this that explains all of the colors. I'm using these colors to show you from so that you have a reference to that. And I'm also using the Canson Motteville watercolor in cold press. So what I did was I drew two big circles here so that we can have fun playing with them, and so I can show you the importance of adding a muted color. I'm using the Da Vinci Cassino No. 2 quill brush. It's my favorite brush because it holds a lot of paint. It's very soft and it allows me to maneuver the paint the way that I like it. What we're going to start off doing is just adding light values to both of these circles. What I'm going to do here is paint this circle, and we're going to work with values. So I'm going to paint this one yellow. I want a light layer of color. When you are working in watercolor, this is full strength. The more water you add, the lighter it gets in value. So I'm going to try to go in between these two because I want this little circle to have a glow, but I don't want to fight this original color because for me this is too bright of a color, where in between these two is a nicer color to work with. So that color on my palette, I'm just adding some water to it. You can already see that's a much softer value than that, but yet it's going to give me the luminosity that I want. I'm going to splash that one. I'm going to be working it on 2 circles at a time just so that I can move around and they will dry. So while that one's drying, let's work on this circle. This one I want to do in green. So I'm using the serpentine green. Not full strength again, the same kind of water to color ratio. Splash that. I'm splashing to add texture to each layer for myself. I like a lot of texture in my work. If you don't like that, don't add the water. I've dried this just so that we can work ahead. I'm going to look at our yellow swatch from the previous video, and as I start deepening, I know that I want to get to this area. Now this was buff titanium. This was mixed with lavender. This was the more lavender because of the complementary color of yellow as violet. And then this bottom one was neutral tint. So I really want to get to this neutral tint color. What I want to walk you through though is instead of buff titanium, I'm going to start with the lavender because these are closer in value than this one. They still have the same kind of greenish tinge, and that's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go to my palette here, mix some more yellow, and I'm going to pick up some lavender. Do you see how it changed the color and muddied it up? Let's make it a little brighter up here. I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm going to pick up some of that more grayed color. That's the lavender mix. I want to leave a little center of that lighter color. Let's just say we're turning this into an apple. I'm going to touch a little bit more lavender into the mix while it's wet. Do you see how it's already starting to take form? This is just water on my brush. I'm going to soften that little edge. I'm going to splash. Okay, let's go to the green. I'm going to look at the green here. And again, this was the buff titanium, this was lavender, this was the complementary, and this was neutral tint. The complementary here is more of a kind of olive green. What I want to do with this one is use this buff titanium and then use the neutral tint, because I like the dullness here, and then I like the dullness here at the very bottom as well. I didn't want to introduce this color, which is more of a kind of gray green. I want to stick more to the truer color. All right, we need some serpentine. And remember, this is very light, so I don't want this real heavy. And let's add some buff titanium. I just want to dull the color. That's all I'm trying to do here. That's a nice color. A little duller. Okay. Test it out. You can see it's a little darker. That's what I want. Brush just water, so I rinsed it out. I'm going to soften that edge. While it's wet, I'm going to take a little bit more buff titanium in there. Splash. While that's drying, what I'm going to do here is at the bottom, I'm going to start with a light little area of a yellow again, because I want to show you the difference of what we're doing here. So you can see that's about the first value. Let me do a green the same way. Need probably a little bit more green. The first one started out a little bolder than that. There we go. Splash that as well. I went ahead and dried these so we can add our second layer and catch up to where we are on the top ones. Now this is just by adding more yellow, because I want to show you the advantage of adding the other colors. If I go into just plain yellow now, which is that bright color, put it kind of in the same area or the other one is shaded. Damp brush, just sectioning it off here, softening it. Splash. And then let's go into the green one. Just green now. Damp brush, soften it out, splash. I've dried everything and I just want you to see the difference so far. Look at how intense this is starting to become, both of these, and look how dull these are still, but yet they still shine from within. Because remember, we started with this brightness, but in that kind of value. So that still has a nice shine to it, where this one is becoming more intense and more intense. And this is why I prefer painting with muted colors on my layering, because it gives it a little more realistic. And you can see with the greenery too here, that is the one where we added buff titanium to it. You can see along the edges here, it's a little more natural to me. Look how bright and almost garish that is becoming. You'll see the next step now. We're going to add the neutral tint with the yellow. We're going to deepen that, but this we're going to keep brightening and shading with this bright yellow so that you can see the difference. So I want to add the yellow here with some neutral tint, just a touch. Remember, I'm looking for it to turn kind of greenish gray. Yes, look at that color. So I'm comparing it. Do I need it a little darker? And yes, I do. This value here is a little darker than this. So I need to add a little bit more neutral tint. That color's great. So this color now is deeper than this. On the first shadow, I went wider. On this next level, I'm going to cut it in half. So from wide to narrow. I'm testing the value. It looks perfect. It's nice and dark, rich. Just water on my brush. Let's soften that out. And I'm going to splash one more time. Notice that I splashed every time with my layers because I want that texture in every layer. I don't want the bottom all textured and then the top comes out and it's just blah. I don't want that. Now the green, we're going to add the neutral tint as well. So I've got serpentine here. And neutral tint. You can see I got way too dark. If I put that dark on there, it's going to be way too dark. So let me add a little bit of green to this pile. And I think that's perfect. Let's give it a check. Yes, that's nice. Rinsing my brush, just water on it. And I'm going to splash again. Let's go on to our shapes below. We're going to add just yellow, more intense this time, so thicker paint. Again, just a little bit, so half this, half the size. Rinsing my brush, softening the edge, splashing. Now we're going to do the green here, so that was serpentine, thicker paint. Just water on my brush, soften it out, splash. Now, what do you notice right away? I'm looking to make my art a little more realistic. So which apple looks most realistic to you? Is it the one where we just used the brighter color and we kept getting more intense and more intense? You can see the intensity of the green and yellow here versus these two. Yes, this is still green and this is still yellow, but yet it's not as intense, and that's because I've used those muted colors. They do make a difference. They allow to me, they allow your eye to rest a little easier. To me, these seem like a more natural kind of color palette. This seems just really bright, like almost unnatural. There is nothing wrong with this color palette if you like brights and that's the way that you want your artwork to look. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. It is more, to me, this is more illustrative. This is more real to life. There is a place for all kinds of art. So just don't listen to what I'm saying by all means. It doesn't mean that my way is correct. This is just how I do my art, which is why muting colors is really important to my palette. I hope just by showing you the little differences of these versus this, you see the value of a muted palette and what it can do for you. Again, that was just Buff Titanium, Neutral Tint, Serpentine Genuine, and Hansa Yellow Medium. Those were the 4 colors that I used. If you have only neutral tint, it's going to work. Just by adding those 2 innocent colors, Buff Titanium and Neutral Tint, to your palette, you will be able to make more natural looking illustrations or natural looking paintings. But that doesn't mean that's the only way. Remember, we talked about complementary colors in the lesson previous to this one. But I just wanted to explain to you how I use the muted palette, because a lot of you have questions for me on that. And I just wanted to give you an overall aspect to why I do what I do and why I am in love with a muted palette. I hope this explained it a little better. If you were inspired by today's content or found it valuable, please leave me a comment. I would love to hear what you have to say about this. And as always, thanks so much for spending time with me and watching my content.